Now joined by Danny Shaw, who absolutely does. He's a Home Affairs commentator and former advisor to Yvette Cooper before she was a Home Secretary. Good morning to you, Danny.
Good morning, Julia.
Thank you so much for joining us. Let's talk about prisons. It is extraordinary, this National Audit Office report. I mean, to be fair, it's pretty critical of, pretty much every government, but particularly unhappy with the last few Tory governments for their abject failures when it comes to prisons. But this report has basically said, we haven't built enough prisons, and we had policies under various governments to put more people in prison for longer, but no one actually thought we should build some more prisons. And when they did, they're now 5 years overdue and running 5 years behind, and massive overspend. Does any of this surprise you, Danny?
Hi, Julia. The report didn't really surprise me because I've been covering this area and I've reported on what's been going on.
Yeah.
And it really comes down to a lack of joined upness around the criminal justice system, because we had two things happening. We had sentencing being increased, so people serve longer in prisons, and rightly so in many cases, particularly for violent and sexual crimes. Those sentences have ramped up, and I think that was the correct thing to do. The second thing was that Boris Johnson put money in to recruit an extra 20,000 police officers from 2019 to 2023 to reverse the cuts that the Conservatives had made before that. But that has had the effect of increasing the number of arrests, charges, court cases, and therefore people being sent to prison. So the impact of all that is that there are not enough prison places, and it's projected that in 3 years' time we'll have a shortfall of around 12,000 places. At the same time,
I mean, that's well over 10, 12. What's that? About 15% of our prison places, basically. Because we've got about, what, 88, 89,000?
86,000 or something like that in prison at the moment. And don't forget, that number is being kept lower because of the emergency release schemes that this government and the previous government have had to introduce to try and just sort of, keep a lid on things. So yes, the prison building programme has not kept pace with the other changes that have been made. So I heard you talking earlier about the fact is we need to build more prisons. I think that's right. This pledge that the extra, I think it's 14,000 from the 20,000 that haven't been built will be constructed by 2031. That is going to cost around £10 billion, £5 billion more than previously planned because of inflation, construction costs, supply chain problems, and so on. But there's also a looming problem, Julia, around the maintenance of the current estate. It's in an absolutely dire state, and the collapse of the construction firm ISG, which was going to maintain and build some of these new prisons, that has just made things worse, and will put back that maintenance program.
And we know the impact of these, the terrible conditions. Now, a lot of people say, well, you're behind bars, you're not going to be in a, five-star hotel. We're talking about people having to go to the toilet, in their cells. But, cells that were designed for 1 or 2 people being used for 2, 3 or 4. We're talking about people who are basically locked in their cells 23 hours a day. Lack of resources, lack of security. We've seen prison escapes because of sort of complete breakdown of resources within prisons. There is absolutely a crisis within our criminal justice system. Is the answer to send fewer people to prison, as the new government seems to think, and in particular to focus on community sentencing? Certainly for women, that seems to be the view. The default that a woman doesn't go to prison unless it's the most heinous crime. But for men, the idea that it's like, well, tagging, house arrest, you carry on with your job, if you've got one, you carry on keeping it, able to pay your rent and the like. And do you have any hope at all that that is going to make a difference?
Well, I think we're right to build more places. We've always got to have more prison places, and we've got to have decent accommodation, and we've got to have the capacity in prison so people can do rehabilitation programs, education, training and skills. So that's the first thing. In terms of the sentencing changes, I think there are some people in prison who would be better served, particularly people who have mental health problems, to be dealt with in different ways, either in mental health institutions in secure centres there, or possibly in the community where they get mental health support. I think there's no doubt about that. There may be some. I'm against the idea of scrapping short prison sentences. I think they're a really important last resort for magistrates and judges. Some people, I think, need a short, sharp burst in prison. For communities and victims, they also need a break from some persistent offenders.
This is the key thing, isn't it? And we know this, Dan. With Benedict and I were talking about it earlier. You know, something in the region of 10% of criminals commit more than 50% of crimes. Some people just simply, it's better for everyone if they're off the streets. And if you're not putting what's often called like petty crime, but it's not petty for the victims. Your bag stolen, shoplifting. If you're trying to run a business and trying to pay the rent yourselves, these aren't petty crimes.
Yeah, and I think the debate around this, Julia, is been a bit too focused on the offenders and reoffending. Of course, we want to see offenders come out and lead a life clear of crime. Of course, we want to do, because that means fewer victims. But also, victims and communities want a break from some of these people, and they want them to go behind bars. So a domestic abuse victim really wants to see the perpetrator locked up for a bit, to give her time, and it's normally a woman, her time to sort of reset and reestablish her life, and also to get that clear break from the offender.
Absolutely.
So, you know, prison is really important, and short prison terms should not be discarded. But I think there are some other means, possibly, of reducing the population in terms of people who have mental health problems. I would also say that for some 18 to 25-year-olds who are treated as adults in the system, when they've just, you know, that cut off, suddenly you're a child, suddenly you're an adult. We know that people's brains are still developing into their mid-20s.
But,
you know,
but we also know that that age group are the ones responsible for most violent crime. So, that, you know, it depends how you feel. Just one final question, as brief as you can, Danny. As a former advisor to Yvette Cooper, look, she's a sharp cookie. I don't agree with her on some crucial things, but she's a sharp cookie. She's not, you know, she's not an ingenue. She's been covering this brief for, you know, for decades, frankly. What is her thinking on the criminal justice system that you know of?
Yvette's pretty tough, I think, around criminal justice, but she's also realistic because she's seen, I think, some of the failings of the past, and in terms of, and she will be aware that although she wants to see the police arrest more perpetrators, charge more perpetrators, get them before the courts, she's very concerned about the slump in the charge rate, which has gone from about 15% to around 6% in the last 7 or 8 years. She will be aware that as you process those cases through the justice system, that's going to create problems for the other department, for the Ministry of Justice, which looks after the courts.
Exactly, it all falls on, doesn't it? Danny Shaw, always good to talk to you. Thank you very much indeed. I say for me, I would rather just put my taxes up, build a load more prisons, and just end early release. Tomorrow, no early release. You get sentenced to 10 years, you serve 10 years. You get sentenced to 3 months, you serve 3 months. I don't know what's complicated about this, but there we are.